Now, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
This is progress.
It's working.
Okay. Well, this is the Leadership Hour with me, Des Walsh, and on the Gold Coast of Australia, and Sandy Corriel in Los Angeles. Unhappily, more in the news in the last couple of days, but hopefully things will settle down a bit.
Hopefully so.
Yeah. So today or this evening, if you're on the northeast of the USA, we're going to, or the East Coast, we're going to talk about, this is the topic we'll start on. Who knows where it'll lead, Sandy?
Wherever it goes, we're flexible.
Yeah, wherever it goes. Leadership and creative industries. And I put up a couple of tweets or such posts on social media saying, is leadership in creative industries or with creative people like herding cats, you know? And and I'm reminded of some work I did with some theatre companies and with other. I've done a lot with arts organisations over the years, and there's a perennial problem challenge for creative industries. You get management type people doing the management type stuff, the administration, and then you get creative people doing the creative stuff, which is fair enough. But sometimes you get a real challenge. And I remember one theatre company where I was on the board, and we basically said, I said it, I'll take responsibility. I said at one of these meetings, after there'd been a few meetings where the manager would come to the meeting and the artistic director would come to the meeting, and they would have their fights in front of us, sort of thing, and want us to arbitrate. And I just said, look, you know, neither of you is doing yourself any good doing this. You need to sort this out before you come to the board meeting. You know, you're going to be both in a much better position if you've solved these problems before you get to us, because you're asking us to arbitrate on stuff and take sides, and that's not going to work.
Right.
So that was just one example of where leadership with creative people, that administrator, that manager, had a responsibility to manage the situation in such a way that the artistic director was not feeling threatened or mistreated or whatever. You know, does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
No, and I thought you would like this topic, Sandy, because you've had so much experience with the creative world, and yeah, and it's. I don't think it's. I'll nail my flag colours to the mast, as they say, right now, and say I don't think this is ever going to be solved. I think this is an environmental reality for any organisation that has creative people in it. And it's an environmental reality for any leader, managing director, divisional leader, you know, management of a theatre company, an art gallery, whatever it happens to be, a creative agency. You know, you get those old tussles between the suits and the creatives in advertising agencies. That's part of the rich fabric of life. But there are, I assume there are lessons to be learnt from that. You got some thoughts on that before we open it up to a few of our guests?
I think some of it is you're seeing less and less of it as the world starts going more warp speed, and in creative agencies, you're really having to have more of that entrepreneurial spirit, no matter what size agency you have. There's less and less of those distinctive silos in good creative organizations. It's not to say they don't exist, they do. But when we talk about looking at who does it well, no matter what your role is, you all think of yourself as being in a creative industry, even if you're the CFO. And you have to figure out a way to really manage that from that standpoint of having that mindset, no matter where you came from. And you see a lot more of the people who lead those organizations as coming from the ranks of having been a creative, and you know, to, as we would say, they may cross over to be technically on an org chart a suit, but you still want to have that spirit of being a creative. I think the one overriding thing in creative agencies is it's people. and having that spirit and having those values is what's going to drive the ability to succeed or not succeed.
I had a lesson in this many years ago, and I was working in an organization that was in supporting the arts and cultural development, and there was a notable he was a lord, actually, from England, a notable man who'd run, I think, the Arts Council of Great Britain. And someone asked, what makes a good arts administrator? And I was hanging on his words because I was a fledgling arts administrator. And he said, and I quote him literally using a term that is not so much in use these days, but he said, but it's stuck in my mind all these years. He said that an arts administrator must first of all be a good administrator,
mm-hmm.
and secondly must have bowels of compassion for the artist. Yes. So if you, and I've seen this, I've seen people come into arts organizations who were accountants or who were good administrators in some other context, but because they didn't have an empathy with the artists or the artist's way of doing things or thinking or creating things, there was always an uncomfortable tension. So there had to be some element of emotional engagement with the creative process for that person to do his or her job well.
Yeah, you have to know what you're asking of people. You're asking people to creativity and being able to produce in a creative environment, especially when it's also a business and you're under the gun and you're asking people to come up with the next great idea in the restrictions of a business, in the restrictions of time and money and productivity. You're asking a lot of people, and if you can't connect, it's not going to work. You have to have that type of understanding and empathy of what you're asking of people so that you can build your culture and your values and your rewards based on that.
Yep. Now, we have Fred with us. Thanks, Fred, for making it here. And I just did an interview with Fred, Sandy,
cool.
And it's up now as a podcast. In fact, I'll put the podcast link in. And it was great. Let me just find it here. So we spent half an hour or so on Skype, and there are some notes that go with it, but you have to listen to it for the real juice.
I definitely want to hear it.
There we go. Yeah, so there's only us at the moment, but Fred, if you'd like to take a seat, you're welcome, but I know you've been driving, and yes, that was fun, Fred. The care, cleaning, and maintenance of creatives is a full-time job. I like it. If you'd like to jump in and grab a seat, that'd be great. If not, you're welcome. So
I like Fred.
So what are the?
Sorry, I like Fred's use of the word cleaning. The cleaning of creative. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I like that one. I like that description.
We know what it is. We know what it means. By the way, and I know I don't want to get into discussions about the U.S. presidential race, but I did watch a movie last night. A movie about this guy Ben Carson. He's got fascinating history with his work as a neurosurgeon. Amazing stuff he's done. Do you know anything about that? He became world expert at separating conjoined twins.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's performed many of these operations where the heads are joined together, and, separating them without killing them, sort of thing. I mean, he had a few failures. It's an amazing story, played by Cuba Gooding Jr. And
I guess in that regard, he's a creative leader too. It had to be a little bit of creativity in that.
Well, you know what? You know what was interesting about this? When he was very young, his mother was trying to get him to use his imagination. He said, "I can't imagine things." And then he had a kind of experience he was at church, and the pastor was telling this story very dramatically, and the young Ben Carson suddenly started to see these pictures and creating his own version of him in the story of what the pastor was talking about. And he rushed home and told his mother, I can imagine things. So, and because nobody had kind of been there before with this separation of conjoined twins, he had to imagine how he was going to solve all the problems.
You're making a good point in terms of if in general, every company, if they're going to succeed, has to be somewhat of a creative agent. They have to be a creative organization. And when you talk about fields like medicine, you don't think of it necessarily that way, because even when there are advances, it seems like it's down to the nitty-gritty of research and putting it all together step by step. And that process is there. But somebody had to be able to see something different, make something out of nothing. And that's what you're asking of people to do in creative organizations, is make something that wasn't there before, or see it in a totally different light. Yeah. And he did it there.
Yeah. Well, whether this was true or this was made up, he's wrestling with this problem of how to separate the two, and they still live without, because there's massive bleeding,
right.
And apparently small children don't have a lot of blood, so you don't have a lot to go on, to spare. So he's reading all these books. He had these volumes, and he's reading day and night. Took months trying to find a solution. And he's sitting in his kitchen, and his mother's there, and she's doing a bit of the washing up and stuff. And he sees this tap faucet dripping slowly like that, and then switched off. And he has the inspiration that if he can create a moment where what they do is he knows that the heart can be stopped. For heart operations, the heart can be stopped for an hour without the person dying, So he says, we've got a window of an hour in which to do the separation, to shut off all those veins, and because all these myriad veins, and to sort of seal everything up, so to speak, on either side. And it was the inspiration of the drop coming from the tap that, after all this reading, and because his mother was saying, you have it all here, you don't need the books. His mother's an illiterate, woman, literally couldn't read and write. And she's saying, you have it all here. Yep. She knew he'd read the books because she got him to start reading when he was a kid. But it's fascinating about the process of creativity.
Well, and that again is
he said basically he was saying, I don't want to do this because these kids could die. And they're saying, you're the one, you are the leading person on this. And so he had to step up to the leadership role that was there for him.
Well, part of what he did there is what leaders in creative industries have to do. There's so much pressure in those industries, whether it's pressure to keep clients or to members, or you're trying to make these really good decisions under so much pressure. So a lot of what creative industry leaders have to do is make sure that there's escape valves and there's pressure releases throughout the day, because that is a lot of times when the brain can step away from the pressure and they can step away from the intensity. That's when they're going to come up with the solution and the brilliant idea. Yeah. So it's a bit of what he did there, is he stepped away from it and was able to come up with a solution.
There were no books. He was just sitting talking with his mother, and he just saw this tap, So and I've seen some. Hi, Bryn. Oh, Bryn, great. If you want to jump in, Bryn, you're very welcome. Grab a seat. So Bryn's a expert on LinkedIn, among other things. Sandy?
Yeah, I think Bryn has sat in with us in one of our early blabs.
That's Bryn right.
Sat in with us.
Absolutely right. That's correct, yes. And Fred's gone off to freshen up. He's been driving and going to have a coffee and stuff. Okay, Bryn. But if you want to leave some comments in the chat, that'd be great. So we're talking, as we indicated, about leadership and creative industries, and we're using that terminology broadly. But creative industries can be advertising, can be a performing arts company, can be an art gallery, can be, and in some say, and Sandy in a way saying, I think every industry, every company really has to be creative in some ways. Maybe it always had to be, but particularly now. This is a country story, like what we call in Australia a bush story, Sandy. My great-grandfather was a school teacher in a country town, and he was in town one day, and he was going past the shop, and I remember my mother telling me this story, and the owner of the shop's name was Mr. Henneke, and my grandfather was Thomas Murphy. So Thomas Murphy is my mother's father. He goes in, he steps into the shop, and he's having a word with the owner, and he said, Mr. Henneke, I don't want to embarrass you, but you've got a sign outside that I just feel I have to say something about. And he said, what's that, Mr. Murphy? He said, well, it says potatoes tuppence a pound, and it spells potatoes P-E-R-T-A-T-E-R-S. And he said, and that's not how you spell potatoes. And Mr. Henneke said, I do know that, Mr. Murphy, but you'd be amazed at the number of people who come in here to tell me that and who buy something.
Yep, that good old marketing.
So I think the creative marketing.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, and Bryn says it matters more than ever to be for leaders to be innovative, and you've commented on that. Yeah. So I agree with that. Sorry when I'm peering down there, I'm trying to read the column.
Yeah, I know. We're still trying to get that side.
I don't miss anything. Yeah. So what would you think would be? So I suppose a contemporary situation would be a tech startup where you've got, by definition, some creative types who've developed some app. They're all enthused about it, and you've got they know they have to bring in a couple of people who are experienced with management and with marketing and with all those things. What would you do? What sort of things would you say to them, Sandy, if someone said, Sandy, we know you know how to deal with the suits and you know how to deal with the creative people. We want you to come in and give them a little workshop. How would you get them to understand what was ahead of them in terms of how they needed to work together?
I think some of it's probably more than a workshop because it's it's a more modern version of it's got to go beyond skills transfer. I think of workshops as skills transfer, and being able to, even the way you said it, the suits versus the creative, it's making people know that it's not them and us. Talent is your core issue in any of those type of companies. Because, you said it, you've got people who have this app that they just fall in love with. And that's what creatives do. They fall in love. And then they've got somebody, whether it's an investor at a startup company or their boss or a client or whoever it is, who goes, and a lot of times in creative, things get shot down and things just disappear because somebody's like, I don't like it. It's not as logical. You're making subjective decisions, and you have to have it in you. You have to be relentless to keep coming up with those ideas. Get shot down, come back. Get shot down, come back. And keep doing it with the same level of enthusiasm. So it's being able to develop leaders, and I'm not even going to call them suits or creatives. It's just whoever the leaders are in those organizations have to be able to get people so that they're so enthused and so much a part of the outcome that they can do that. They can be relentless in not just being good, not just being really good, but being the absolute best, and keep coming back for more with that same level. And a big part of that is helping people really know how to work together, putting together the teams. Bryn's saying, I often say to a suit, if you had a magic wand, you could wave it over your team, what would they look like? The question brings out the creative. What do you mean, Bryn, when you say the question brings out the creative? I'd love to hear that. I know you're not in a place where you can jump on. But that is part of it, though, is you've got that pressure of having to make quick, good decisions on a continuous basis when you are, let's call it a suit in this situation. Whoever that person is who's responsible for the P&L of, which is typically your suit. It's typically the distinction you get is somebody who's actually got to watch the numbers and the productivity and all of those things that creative people don't love to hear and don't love to talk about. That person is typically the one who's got to provide the balance, and they've got to be able to.
It's that. Remember when we've talked before about the Mad Men series? It's that English guy who's the finance guy, and he has to be the nasty one, or the one who's saying, no, we can't do that.
Exactly.
How are we going to pay for this?
Or it's Roger, it's Roger who's out there having the martinis with the client, and then coming back and sitting in the creative room and throwing out some good ideas. He's trying to bridge that, he's trying to bridge that gap between.
One of the things I would be saying I'd be saying to the people, the developers who've come up with the app, and as you say, they're in love with that, and they haven't thought it out enough in terms of user experience. It's because they've got this. Like I had a colleague once who was brilliant at advanced mathematics, and he said, "Don't you find maths beautiful?" And I thought it was all here. It was like a great work of art for him. For me, it was just hard slog. But if I were doing that, I'd say, what you have to learn to do is exactly what you were saying. You have to be resilient in advancing your own creation. And I had an experience once where I was given I was in a kind of medium level leadership role, and I was given a project to do, which was a national program campaign, and I came up with these ideas to how to do it, and I'd write these briefs, and I'd take it into the chairman, and he'd look at it, and he'd put his pen through it, and say, no, not good enough, and send me away. So finally, I put a whole lot of effort in. I came up with this, what I thought was going to work, and he said, well, what have you got this time? I said, I'm really at a loss to know whether to give this to you. And he said, why? He said, because we're just going to shoot it down. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, tell me. So I told him the idea, and he went, bang. And I said, see, you just did it. And after that, he always let me have my head, because I stood up to him. He was pushing me to really stretch myself. So he did me a favor by being an asshole.
There you go.
Who have we got? Billy Bob, founder and CEO of Empathy. We design and execute high-impact employee feedback campaigns. If you'd like to jump in and grab a seat, Billy Bob, you'd be very welcome. That looks an interesting kind of thing you do. Very relevant to what we're talking about.
Bryn was talking about, she was talking about having the creatives jump metaphorically into the CEO seat, put on a suit, so to speak, without having the and vice versa. And that's
vice versa,
part of it, is you've got to get them to think about what's the impact of, when a creative is sitting there and trying to come up with a brilliant idea. Oh, cool, Billy Bob. I've been there.
Okay.
When you've got a creative and you're trying to, you're under a deadline to come up with that next great idea, and somebody's sitting there, but we have to get the timesheets in today. It's how do you maneuver that? You've got to let them know why they have to do things like that. And it does sound fundamental, but knowing how that financial picture fits into the big picture is important. And
go
ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say, and I think with creative industries, especially today, you have a lot of freelance talent out there also. A lot of people who aren't necessarily part of the day in and day out. Yep. And it's even more of a challenge, because there's only so many of the best people out there. So how do you get them to want to freelance at your company and to give it their all at your company and be part of the team? So you've got to really, as a leader in creative industries in 2015, understand how you're getting the best out of people who aren't going to be there in a year, probably.
Yeah.
So you're going to, because a lot
one of the things.
Go ahead.
Go on. No, go.
I was just going to say that a big part of
because
no, I was just going to say that a big part of creative industries, the way they're driven is through culture. It's important in any organization, but in creative industries, it's got to be there. It's got to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And when you're you've got to have something built into the culture that the freelancers can feel, and they feel that they're part of. It's got to be one of those, when you pick your 5 or 6 values of what you build your culture on, and then you build all of those processes out of that, you've got to take into account the fact that you have talent that's critical to your success, but may not be there in a month or 2 months. And we know that talent moves around a lot in general these days, but creative industries are so dependent on freelance talent.
I just had posted today on a we'll come to that in a moment, Bob, on a Market Leadership Journal, which I write for, a post I did about knowing yourself. On the Temple of Delphi in the ancient Greeks had know thyself over as people were going into the temple, and so it's a very old principle. And part of that was know where you fit, because that was meant to remind them that they were not as high as the gods, So there was an element of be humbled, and I think that one of the things that people who have those administrative, the account keeping sort of roles, when there are other people who are the more, if you like, creative types, one of the things they have to do, I have had to do, is to develop a sense of self-worth which is not dependent on the good favor of the creative people working with you. So, because I've had people, I know that I've had people saying to me and saying about me, oh, he doesn't understand, because he's not an artist. Well, I did understand it. I was passionate about helping, but I was actually keeping some of the more ruthless people away from them. I was protecting them, and arguing their case in a language that those budget people could handle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense? And the people dealing with a political context and so forth. So the know thyself is important. I have to have my sense of self-worth as the general manager of a creative company, which isn't dependent on the creative people saying, oh, you're wonderful.
Right.
In fact, if they start doing that, I'd start to worry.
Hey, Dad.
Hi, Fred.
Hey, Sandy.
Hey, Fred. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Just listening. I've been listening to the discussion on the speakers. So.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah.
And I had the hockey game going on too. So.
Yeah. So Billy Bob says, how do you balance giving creatives the freedom they need to create while also holding them accountable? And Bryn says, I think setting expectations and goals need to be set together when working with creatives. They have to be part of their own KPIs. It's much easier to hold them accountable when they're part of the decision.
That in fact is the foundational piece.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you allow creatives to just be creative without an end state, their relative worth is, specious at best. If you make them part of the end state or the vision or whatever, you'll find that you'll get an awful lot more out of them. When you were talking about startups earlier, that sort of resonated with me. As you know, Des, I get a lot of venture capitalists called me up saying, "Can you go down and spend a month or so with with this startup? Take your team down, send us the bill, whatever. They don't get money until you're happy." Oh, okay, fine. No job's too big, no fees too big. One of the problems, both people label startups as creatives, and I think there's two separate terms here, because certainly when you talk about dealing with artists, is different than dealing with creatives. First of all, every organization has to have a creative aspect to it, or it ceases. It just becomes entrenched in mediocrity and dies. So there's always a degree of creative. Just because you're a creative person does not mean it's licensed to be an ill-disciplined person or a bad leader or a bad administrator. I know a lot of creatives who are great leaders, great administrators, great managers. I know some creatives, creative, who get lost going to their car in the parking lot. So I mean, it's really based on the individual, not necessarily how creative they are. When I go into startups, generally they're in what I call the dreamer phase. And every good leader or every high-functioning team has to be a mixture of three personalities in my mind. Got to be part dreamer, part pragmatist, and part critic. They're three vital roles here. And really high-functioning creatives get this. There's a time to be the dreamer, and the dreamer believes that everything that is possible is probable. The critic also has a very important job here as well, and this is where startups have a little bit of a problem. Sometimes they're their own worst critic, and a critic is not there to criticize per se, in terms of the popular definition of the word. The critic just says, look, anything that is possible is also problematic. So it says, okay, if we can do this, what are the obstacles, and what are we going to do about them? And the pragmatist is purely the pragmatist. It knows when to take the path of least resistance to get to the end state. And when you're dealing with a lot of startups, people immediately label them, oh yeah, they're creatives. No. They're still in the dreaming phase. So what you need to do is discipline them to go from dreamer to critic to pragmatist. If you're trying to be creative, okay, yes, it's great. Anybody can produce novel and useful concepts, but from a business perspective or any sort of perspective, those concepts are only useful if you can turn them into solutions or product. One of the last jobs I had in uniform, after I had been wounded, they gave me a desk job for a while, and they said, okay, you're going to be the Director of Future Security Analysis for the Government of Canada. I said, oh, great. That's a sexy title. I love it. I'm going to take this job. So I took over this directorate, which had about 60 uniformed people, and also a whole bunch of people, cops from Criminal Intelligence Services Canada, and about 60 defense scientists and economists and guys like that. And they had not really produced much before I got there, and they had been around for a couple of years, and had done some great work. About 120 peer-reviewed papers. I mean, in some really high-end stuff, like at SAMS and Harvard and things like that. And I said, that's great. So what decisions from government have you informed? And I got a lot of deer in the headlights looks, and I said, that is our mission. Our mission is to inform timely decision-making in government. So you can produce all the peer-reviewed papers you want. You've got all these novel concepts that if you not turn them into solutions for the guys who write your paychecks, then you're not achieving your mission. So then I discovered that no one told them what their mission was. And as soon as you give them purpose and discipline them to that purpose, as someone was saying, listen, give them some KPIs, give them some, this is what I want you to work on. I'm not going to give you a box per se, but I'm going to give you some constraints and some restraints. And these are not bad things. All I'm going to do is bound the problem space for you. Constraints are things that you must do. It must be produced by a certain time, and it must be directed to a certain audience, or it's useless. And restraints, things you must never do. There are certain terra incognita that you, frankly, is either not in your mission statement or whatever. And if I find that if you give creatives an endpoint, a vision to work towards, they can become highly focused. The first principle of war and in business is selection and maintenance of the aim. And a lot of people will criticize creatives because they're not, they're all over the place. Well, first of all, let's go back. Let's make sure you're not the problem. Did you give them a place to go to?
When you're
And Red, if I can just say, so this immediately comes to my mind. I know we weren't talking about the sort of artistic, like arts organizations, but it's an old saying in the theatre.
Mhm.
It'll be all right on the night, so there can be this chaos. And I produced a play once, and I was, this is an amateur play, and I think there's a certain amount of ego involved here. I actually cast
There you
myself
go,
in the
Dan.
lead role, and I directed it, and I was doing these rehearsals, and then the flu struck, and so I had to rehearse people in different groups. And we got to a kind of final dress rehearsal, and these groups hadn't worked together before. I had it all in my head. I had the dream, but I also had the end point, which is the result that had to go on the stage, and at the first, there were 2 intervals, I think, and the first interval came off stage, and there was this applause, and these people said, disbelievingly, they like it. And I said, of course. And it suddenly hit me that I hadn't really communicated my vision.
There you go. I mean, but that's a common thing that you see. I've only worked with, let's say, artistic people once. I call them artistic. There was running a war game and a red team exercise for the fragrance industry. Yes.
Really?
I won't say who, because that war game is still running. But
that's a tantalizing juxtaposition of ideas. Wargaming of the
well, yeah, we wargame everything. Our largest client is the Canadian wine industry. So all 400 wineries. That actually they can be very artistic people as well, especially when you deal with the people who do blended wines versus the people who do VQAs, right? So but the fragrance industry guys were these people who live towards an art, but it's I hate the term the suits that have to turn it into a business in a very highly regulated industry, and an industry that also has trade tariff minefields globally. You can have the best smelling fragrance going, but if you don't pay attention to crossing the T's and dotting the I's in terms of international trade and tariff, you can find yourself just selling your perfume at the corner. And just from a U.S. perspective, the FDA regulations that go on to anything that you put on your skin is amazing. But it's one of the funniest things when we started. I was the white team leader for the war game, so I was doing all the design for it, and people were saying, "Well, what's your favorite fragrance?" And I said, "God, you're talking to the wrong guy. I've been wearing Old Spice for the last 40 years."
I would have guessed
I was wearing Old Spice before they even had good commercials.
Let's come back into fashion. Fred.
But no, it's
sorry, go on.
You're right. Working with the artistic types, you got to give them their lead. Okay, but there is a time to. It's almost like a form of laissez-faire leadership. You let the horses run, but you got to know when to pull back the reins. And as I say, the care, cleaning, and maintenance of them is usually pretty high.
Well, everything that people have talked about, my background came out of ad agencies, and so when you start, you're going to have a creative start by you start by developing a strategic brief, a creative brief that everybody's a part of. All the different disciplines are in there, whatever you want to call. So you typically, if it works well, you've got clients in there, you've got creatives in there, strategy people, you've got everybody in there. So you're getting a full perspective. And that's the borders. Those are the guidelines you put around people. And then they can go in their room, and then they have all that freedom within those constraints to develop, to collaborate. Where some of the finesse of leadership of creatives comes in is it's very rare that's not going to change. So
true. Sometimes the most innovative solutions come from creative thinking outside the expertise of that particular industry. I do wargaming for the wine industry, and frankly, I buy wine by the box. But I'll give you one of the really good examples. It was in you're all familiar with the Gatorade brand, right?
Yep.
So Gatorade was trying to, how much better can you make Gatorade? You can only put in so many flavors and electrolytes, right? Before it becomes salt water. So they were trying to come up with a dribble-proof or a leak-proof thing for their bottles, and you see them on a lot of bottles now. They have that little rubberized. I don't even know what you call it. So you can drink it and nothing dribbles out. Do you know how that was invented?
No.
It's actually a funny story. So a whole bunch of these guys are sitting in there in Gatorade headquarters in New York, and they're trying to come up with a drip-proof bottle for Gatorade. And they had engineers there, and they had their marketing people there, and they had their production people there, and they just couldn't figure this thing out. And during the coffee break, one of the guys said, "Oh yeah, I've had a great weekend. Bought my daughter a pony, so that she can take riding lessons and all this kind of stuff." And one person said, "Oh, this is a pretty messy animal to get. I mean, you might as well buy a bunch of shovels too, and brushes." And he says, "No, actually, horses don't crap on themselves. Did you know that they have 2 sphincters, and poop comes in one side, sticks in the middle, and the other sphincter opens up, and the poop just shoots out, and nothing leaks." And then the entire conversation stopped. And the Gatorade bottle is based on the double rectum of a horse.
That's lovely. We can always count on you, Fred.
Billy Bob says this whole blab is just
I can hear you. I can see you. I can see it. Well,
I think Billy Bob has to refresh.
even when you think of the origins of Gatorade, what was it? University of Florida?
That's brilliant.
Because they were playing football in the heat and they needed something to replenish. So, and that's how it started. And I think when you find that in a lot of ad agencies, marketing companies, you work with so many partnerships that you're going to get that back and forth. And that's part of the finesse of leading those teams is to give people ownership without being so wedded to the idea that they're not open to hearing somebody who's not in the core team might have the best idea. They only can do that if they're confident and if they understand that that's all a part of the best outcome is to have that openness and have that ability to listen to other people and listen to other ideas, because creative
but that takes capacity, leadership capacity to do that.
Absolutely. That's what I mean. So that's the finesse of leadership.
If you look at 3M as an example, so in 3M, technically, everyone's supposed to spend 10% of their time on projects of their own.
Right.
Come up with good ideas. And if 3M will say, "We'll help you with the patents for it. We will give you 5% of production," and da 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 da. And I was talking to someone from 3M. It was about 6 months ago, and I said, "That's always been your hallmark is on innovation." And they say, "It costs us time and it costs us money, but it's worth it."
Right.
Even if less than 1% of those good ideas turn into money. Remember, we're a global company. It turns into global money,
right?
And it's a unique motivator as well. So if you say, "We're going to take care of all the production for you and the marketing for you and all this, and we're going to give you 1% of our global market profits on that," the lady who designed Stick-It notes, essentially retired, and she was a secretary for one of the marketing guys.
Great story.
Not only that, they invented duct tape. I mean,
well, hell,
come on. Wasn't for duct tape, I'd be in a sorry mess.
I don't even want to know, Fred.
I'm still thinking about the Gatorade story. I can understand why they don't publicize that story.
That's a perfect example, though, because most companies, creative or not, aren't going to do that. They're not going to give the profits to the people that came up with this brilliant idea or to the team. So, in absence of that profit, that money going to them, how do you keep that creativity train rolling when you're asking more and more every day. You know, it doesn't stop. I mean, even if people, the well runs dry sometimes unless they're invigorated to replenish it.
Well, a lot of people say creativity is top down, bottom up, or bottom up, top down. I like to think of it this way: creativity is first of all, is non-directional, but it certainly only works if it's championed top down.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, I was thinking that you know, putting this another way, we talk about leaders and vision. So vision is another aspect of being creative. I mean, it's the imagination thing. And I think you might have been not here, Fred, when I was talking about this Republican
I heard it on the speakers as I was making coffee and getting changed.
You're listening, okay? So, yeah. So this vision thing, and one of the people you've mentioned to me a few times, Fred, is the great legendary World War II general, who got multiple knighthoods, Sir William Slim, who then became Governor General of Australia. And there, I was just thinking, here's this man. He's not. Yeah, he's come from a fairly slow start in terms of the military, but then he's gone through First World War, and he's here in the Second World War. He's been in the Indian Army, all this. He's in Burma. The Allied troops don't think they can win against this indomitable Japanese force. They actually think they're better at jungle warfare. They're more superior numbers, all of this sort of thing. And he actually, you're talking about turning the possible into the probable. He sees victory when other people see defeat. But then he's also extremely pragmatic about the discipline that's needed and the whole thing about the malaria. You know, Sandy, this guy, he realized that one of their worst enemies was not just the Japanese, but the malaria. So he imposed this very strict requirement on officers to ensure that their men took their quinine. And they did. Some of them didn't take it seriously, and he sacked some of them. And they said, "Oh, he's real. This is real. You know, we're going to lose our jobs." So then they had a much lower.
Yeah, and it's a good example when leaders have to say "my way or the highway," right? When it's mission critical stuff. Yeah. Another good example from that same time period. Yeah.
So it wasn't that he wasn't a dreamer. He wasn't. He was visionary. Right. He's also highly.
But he was also a very good critic.
Impressed reading that story. Yeah.
Right, and he, you know, if you compare him to somebody like Monty hated critics. All right, so Monty hated anybody who said, "Well, sir, do you think there's a bit?" No. So he actually really got into the red teaming thing. Okay, here's my plan. I want you guys to beat the hell out of it before we commit troops to battle. Another good guy, another good contemporary from that time, who is, you know, sadly misinterpreted many times, is Douglas MacArthur. So again, the same sort of conundrum, right? So he's in Australia. He's got not the 20 American troops. He's only got so many Australians he can use. The British are pretty much they're pretty much toast at this particular point. They're useless in this part of the world by the time 1941 rolls around, and frankly, they got bigger fish to fry. You've got the Japanese essentially all through Indonesia. So the Japanese are from Singapore all the way to Midway, or all the way to Guam, right? And there's not too.
Yeah. And he's sitting just up the road here in Brisbane.
So he says, "Okay, we're going to go on the attack," and everyone went, "What? We're only outnumbered 10-1." So guys, we're going to hit them. No, we're not going to hit them where they are. We're going to hit them where they ain't. So every place MacArthur attacked in Indonesia didn't have any Japanese on it. But as soon as he got there, all their other essentially everywhere else the Japanese were entrenched became untenable, and they had to move. For the first year and a half, MacArthur gained more ground than anybody else in any of the Allied theaters of operation without actually shooting at anyone. But that was a highly creative way to use what forces he had at his command.
Yes.
Which is, there's lessons for business.
Right.
So if you're entering a, that's what I tell
Yes.
them, that's what I tell startups all the time. If you're entering a mature market, okay, don't take on the big guys
Yeah.
where they are. Hit them where they ain't.
Right.
And almost everybody
Yeah.
wants to go where the big guys are. I said, you're not going to survive contact with that battle. So find other areas where you can go in and be disruptive. And as soon as you do that, the market will come to you. In almost every case, that's what happens with startups. But you've got to create that initial opportunity. And once they do that, then their venture capital say, okay, yeah, you can keep the money. And that's the kind of engagements I like, because you're in and out in a couple months.
So, Sandy, have you seen any examples of in your career of leaders who had that kind of almost a magic touch of being able to work with different kinds of people and get them all, working towards
absolutely.
the same kind
I
of
think
goals? With the usual
the agency that I worked for many years was led by a former creative who became the global CEO. And he was able to translate that magic that he had. He was the guy who came up with the 2 all-beef patty special sauce. That was him. And, so he had that magic.
Blame him then. Okay.
What? Yeah, he was one of the original Mad Men for sure. He had that touch in his in the success in his own career, and he was able to translate it. Every single person that worked for that company felt like he knew them personally. They knew him personally. He was one of those people that traveled the globe and spent time and had that smile. You felt that you knew what you were there for. You knew why you were there, and it was all different types of people all over the globe. I guarantee whether he was walking into my office in Los Angeles or an office in London or in the Middle East or wherever he walked in, we all had the same feeling when he came through the door. And he was great. All those things you hear about how to engage people, he did. I remember sitting as probably a mid-level manager sitting at a dinner table with him. There were probably 6 or 7 of us, including clients, and he told the story as if we were there of how he came up with the 2 all-beef patties jingle. And you were mesmerized. But he brought you into that private world of creating, and so he was absolutely able to do it. And I think that other creatives that I've come in contact who run really successful creative organizations do the same thing. They bring people along into that magic world that they've created, into the success that they have. And you feel like you're sitting at the dinner table with them. But to Fred's point, but we also knew it was a business. We also knew that client relationships were important. We knew we had quarterly goals to hit, and we had annual goals to hit, and 5-year plans. But we were okay with that because we were part of the magic.
Right.
Yes, that's got it.
Well, There's 2 parts to this. Having creative people who can create, useful concepts, and also having the team that can turn them into, useful solutions and products, is only as good as the leadership. If the leadership has good, what's the term? Good Germans have a term for this because they're such a common, caring people. Fingerspitzengefühl. No, that's a real word. That's a real word. And it's a.
We'll never know.
Do you think I would? Really? Okay. Well, I accept your challenge. There you go. There's the definition right there.
God, he had it at his fingertips.
Of course I do. Fingerspitzengefühl is a German word, and it's a good one. It's a good German word that says it's for fingertips feeling. It's the meaning that one has an intuitive flair and instinct for determining issues of strategic relevance. It's a superior situational awareness and natural leadership for responding to either an escalated situation or an opportunity. So if you have leaderships that say, that can sit back and say, damn, that's clever. We can make money with that. They immediately go, they can immediately go from dreamer to critic to pragmatist. The wheels turn right away, and they can turn it into something very, very useful. And there's lots of really good examples in business where, or hell, not just business, but in almost any field, where people have produced something absolutely brilliant, or they thought it was reasonably brilliant, and leadership looked at it and said, I'm going to, yes, it either A is brilliant and we can do exactly what you think with it, or it's a good idea for this, but it's a great idea for something else.
Right.
Okay, and it's that natural instinct to be able to look at something and say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to impact the market with it. And the Madison Avenue guys, and we talked about Mad Men. The Madison Avenue guys used to be really good at that, actually. You know that the I got this story from the fragrance guys. Some of the really old, long in the tooth fragrance guys said, "Did you know that remember High Karate?"
Oh yes, that's what I said earlier when you said Old Spice. I said I would have guessed High Karate, Fred.
But I wear Old Spice, and actually this came from the Old Spice conversation that we were having. He said, "Did you know that the High Karate brand name and the commercial was designed before the fragrance?"
Yeah, I believe it. Somebody came up with a good idea.
So a bunch of advertising guys said, I've got a great idea for a men's cologne. Matter of fact, it's, because this is during the Kung Fu era with David Carradine and all.
Yeah, I'm sure it was
High Karate, and you're going to have to beat women off if you put it on. And they said, right, High Karate, here's the commercials, here's the storyboards. And they gave it to a fragrance company and said, design a fragrance for it. Boom.
Well, as I always do, I go to pop culture. That was the old Doris Day Rock Hudson movie with Vip. I'm sure Fred's already.
Right.
Do you remember they came up with the product and they had the campaign running, and then they had to create. That was the whole premise of the movie. Was now we have to create a product. But
God, I'd forgotten about that movie.
You talk military campaigns and MacArthur. I'll talk Doris Day and Rock Hudson, and together we will meet. It's the same point, though. It's amazing.
Together we'll probably come up with a new bottle top for Gatorade.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the stuff you talk about, where you were saying, you called it dreamer, critic, pragmatist, and it is the structure that we went through, whether it was contained in one individual or it was within a team, because you move so fast. It was about, okay, here's the idea, just spitball ideas, no matter how crazy. Then we didn't call it critic, we would call it devil's advocate. What won't work? Why will this fail? And then it's, and how are we going to make money on it? What's the margin on this? And you had to do that all in a quick spin.
Yeah.
And whether it was in one person or you put together the complementary personality, in such a collaborative team that you weren't even knowing that one person had each role. You just naturally did it. It just naturally happened.
High-functioning teams,
right?
They're doing it naturally. High-functioning leaders do it naturally as well.
Right.
In military staffs, as an example, there are certain staffs that do play those roles specifically in terms of whether you're the G3, the operations guys, or the G5, the plans guy, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I mean.
Well, a good leader has picked teams knowing that even if they don't technically assign those roles, like a G3, you're picking people who have those complementary personalities, work styles, that their brain just goes that way, and you're creating teams. And it's not always the most logical person who has the role. It's not always the financial person that goes, how are we going to make money? It might be the person who's client facing, because they're going to have to go cut a contract. But it works. Good leaders will develop their talent based on that. They'll pick their teams. Yeah, sorry, Des.
Can I share a story relating to that from sport? I'm not a sports expert, but I have a client who's big on sport, and he had a basketball game the other night, and he told me this. He's a real strategic thinker, and he coaches and plays, and he said that they're up against this team that they've had challenge with in the past because they've got one particular guy who's a star, and he's a terrific attacking player. And they had developed, they'd studied this guy's play, and the rest of the team were always supporting this one guy to score. And they'd studied him very closely, and they realized, basically, this is my shorthand, if they could shut him down, they could win. So they turn up for the game. They've got all their they've all workshopped this strategy. They're all clear on what they've got to do. This is an amateur team, you know. The guy's not there that night. So they built this whole strategy around this one guy who doesn't turn up. Now, what was interesting was that the rest of the team played above their normal standard. And he said it was as if they kind of intuitively realized they had to do better because he wasn't there, or that they had an opportunity to do better, you know. There's a great rugby player, Jonah Lomu of New Zealand, who died tragically at the age of about 40 just a week or so ago. And one person said that the secret of success for any team that he played in was give the ball to Jonah, you know. And because he's a giant of a man and a brilliant, fast-moving, tactical player, etc. But anyway, so he get to half time and they're losing against this team that they thought they had a dominating strategy to beat. What he observed was that, or what he figured out, this client of mine, was that these guys in the other team were unused to winning without the star. And so he talked to his team and said, we've just got to really hit them very hard right at the beginning because they think they were points ahead, the other team, 10 points ahead or something, you know, and they hadn't been at halftime that far ahead of other teams, his team at that stage. So his team regrouped the whole thing and realized they had to change the whole dynamic, you know, and they won. But because the other team suddenly got demoralized. And it reminded me, and this is kind of a bit of a lateral jump, it reminded me of a lesson I had in sales once, that the guy who was an American who's passed away since, David Sandler, and he said, we all have a tendency to sort of operate at what we think our normal level is instead of reaching above that. And if occasionally we go above that and are very successful, we can drop back very easily to our kind of normal level, if you like. And he says, and often a salesman will have a great day and say, as he said, sitting on the bed, he takes his shoe off and he says, gee, I'm good. And then he takes the other shoe off and he says, but I'm not that good. And the next day his sales go down again. So there's two stories there. One is that if you're the leader, you've got to make sure that the whole team is not dependent on just one person, one very creative person. You've got to make sure that person doesn't have the whole future of your operation or company in his or her hands, you know. That's one of the lessons I would take. The second lesson would be help people to capitalize on that experience they suddenly had when the stars away of excelling what they thought their capability was, and say, you've just got a new benchmark for what being good is, you know. So they
are.
So I thought that was
true.
very instructive for me,
there's an interesting leadership story here too, because you can see a lot of companies that their productivity goes down when the summer vacation hits, right? And certain leaders are messing. And I counseled them and I mentor them, and I said, okay, so do you have a leadership succession plan? Oh yes, absolutely. I said, well, what happens if you? Because we had just been playing golf that day, I said, well, what happens if you get hit by a bus or a golf cart or whatever? He says, well, so-and-so will take over. I said, what if you just don't show up? What? I said, what if you just don't show up? Show up for a week. Watch what happens. He said, I can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? What do you mean you can't do that? I said, what we used to do in the Army, especially when you command a combat regiment, is you pick up the phone and you phone your second in command and say, I want you to call all the officers and tell them that are not going into work today. Call the RSM, tell them he's not going into work today. Call all the battery sergeant majors and tell them they're not going into work today. Well, what are we going to do, sir? I said, well, we'll go into work, but we'll go into work about 1,600 hours. you can't do that. I said, sure we can. Why not? Well, yeah, I guess. And you know what? Kind of interesting, because the people you thought would have naturally taken over in terms of the succession plan of the regiment didn't. And some other, you watch not just what happens, watch who happens.
Right.
So, this rather adventurous client said, "Yeah, let's try that, shall we?" and didn't give all the senior leadership time off. He just picked some select few. Was some where he thought were strong parts of his organization, some where he thought were weak. And you know what? He saw the exact inverse of what he thought he was going to get.
Yeah.
And I said, so what do you think? He says, well, I think I'm spending my leadership development money on the wrong people.
Yeah, you find out real fast, don't you?
Interesting. Very interesting.
Billy Bob's ready for duty. Come on up, Billy Bob.
That's the litmus test for authenticity.
But you also said it, though, where you said you had adventurous clients, because that's one of the things I've found with creative industries is you have a lot of insecure people, and a lot of times they don't want to know what will happen if they're not there. And whether it's they can't miss a client meeting because they don't want that client to get a better relationship with their replacement. And that's a big part of what leaders have to do, is they have to build up that confidence, because you do see a lot of creative organizations that don't have hardcore succession plans because the leaders don't have the confidence and they're too insecure to let anyone else really step in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that through the wargaming process too. And the last step when we do a business wargame is we do the after action review. So you have to turn the exercise into a mechanism of discovery for leadership, but you have to turn it into a mechanism of voice for everybody participated in it. And one of the most common things that we see come up is that the company structure is not necessarily aligned to the actual decisions they need to make.
Right.
Okay, so the authorities, responsibilities, and accountabilities on paper are not actually aligned to the nature of the decisions that need to be made, right? And that's why I usually tell people, here's the following things that you don't bring to a strategy session. Number one, organization charts. End of list, right? So everything else is fair game, because there's some assumptions that come from looking at those things, right? And what you discover in the war game is that as soon as you enable some of these people to have the authority, responsibility, and accountability to actually do the things that you've told them to do, you're going to get a much more pure product. War games are a good crucible. They're especially for long in the tooth organizations, because it allows you to burn away the impurities and have a barbecue with the sacred cows. So, if I can mix metaphors.
Oh my gosh, that might have topped the
Billy Bob.
Gatorade story. Hey, Billy Bob, welcome.
Tell us about yourself, where you're calling in from, what you do.
Hey, I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. So my company does, I would say, internal marketing. So we do employee engagement, but a lot of what we do, Sandy, is the same kind of exercises that you do in advertising. It's just more around crafting those messages to get employees to act. So it's really around motivating change internally. And this topic caught my attention, Des, because I think you don't often see leadership and creativity thrown into the same topic. And there's like this misperception maybe that that they don't belong in the same topic. And what I'm living every day is it all really kind of comes down to it's very much a communication challenge, which always comes back to leadership. And in creative, I know it's something that I'm struggling with in my company, because that's the key for us to be able to scale, is going to be able to scale the creative piece. And that is the hardest piece to scale. Right. And so when I'm saying creative, I'm meaning it more, I think, like you intended, Sandy, where it's not like, can we be creative and come up with ideas? It's more like, okay, we've got to come up with themes that resonate, and okay, there's still only a very small number of people that we trust with that piece, but we've got to figure out how to scale that. And so I'm really interested to hear what you learned.
And exactly what you're doing is a bit of what I do, because I do leadership development now, but I spent 28 years at a global ad agency working on entertainment businesses, and that's exactly what I do. Is I borrow from the creativity of what I learned with branding and marketing and really that communication that goes on in the advertising world. And when I was leading teams, and that, because it's such a high intensity environment, that I borrowed from there. And for me, that's the foundation of how to really establish that communication and those teams that can work together and have leaders who are confident and don't, I don't know if you see this, but I think one of the biggest challenges that we had was that people were so insecure that somebody was going to take their job or somebody was going to take their client relationship, that it was hard to share ownership of the ideas and share ownership of the client relationships. And that was a big part of what can keep you from being able to scale it and scale it within your own organization, or scale it out there in the community where you're thought of as a creative leader, and you're going to attract the type of talent and the type of clients because of it.
I agree with Billy Bob. It's a gross misperception that there is not a connectivity between creativity and leadership. Right. It is absolutely fundamental. And creativity, I would add one more C onto there, is courage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's courage to be creative in a lot of cases. And I find sometimes when guys get a little long in the tooth, their courage quotient drops a little. They play it safe.
Yeah, Sandy, there's a super delicate.
So, Billy Bob,
delicate balance between when you're trying to, I guess, develop creative talent. On the one hand, you mentioned sort of, hey, I'm protected. I'm scared that you're going to take my ideas and maybe take ownership of them and make them yours.
Yep.
The other thing you have to balance is, hey, if you shoot down my ideas 5 times in a row, I'm going to stop submitting them.
Yeah, I think that you missed when we first said that is part of what is so that good creative leaders are able to do is to help develop creativity that's relentless in their people, because it is creative ideas shot down. Yeah, it's creative ideas shot down. Yeah, you have to keep that same level of excitement and passion and ownership. I used to always tell people, you have to feel ownership without getting wedded to it. You have to love the process of it, that process of working as part of a collaborative team and coming up with great ideas. You have to love it as much as you love any individual idea or outcome, because it's that excitement of the process and the environment and the people that you're working with that is going to keep your juices hot when you've just been shot down 5 times internally before it ever got to a client who just kind of went, yeah, I don't like it.
I think, picking up on that, I think one of the responsibilities of a really good leader in that situation is to help, and we're coming at this from different points of view in different ways, but to help the creative people build resilience and courage that we're talking. It's not just about the leader having courage, it's about them, about having the courage. And also, this might sound a little zen, but in a way it probably is, helping them understand how to get detachment from their idea, that they are not their idea, that you see them as a highly creative person. And if this, you know because you see this in them, that if this idea doesn't fly, they're going to have 5 more before the end of the month, and you value them because they're creative, not because of this just one idea. So their whole future, their whole sense of their self-worth they can't make it depend on this idea, or they're just bound for disappointment.
Yeah. That's always the conundrum between individual creativity and group creativity. And that's what leaders are supposed to do, is turn individual creativity into group creativity. And that's why I say don't have your creative process as a group of disassociated individuals. I always like to do the creative process through teams. You can be as individually creative as you want, but it has to fly,
right?
Collectively. I usually tell the leader, say, adopt 3 color roles. And I'm talking about what's his name's, 6 colored hats. I'm just saying basic gaming theory. You, the leader, you're the white team. You're Sergeant Joe Friday. The old dragnet guy. You're just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. All right. The blue team.
Yes.
Yeah, we're really pulling the chestnuts from the 60s today.
I'm with you.
Well, I think there's only 2 of us here that are under 60, Des. So
I'm close. So
anyway,
we know you were a child prodigy.
Me?
At the age of 5.
Right.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, Sandy.
So I thought he was referring to me, and I said, "What the hell are you thinking there?"
He's trying to flatter me, but I know better.
Trying to stroke my ego or something.
You too, Fred.
But the white team leader is essentially, he just looks at the facts. He just looks at the outcome. Take your creative teams and break them down into 2 groups. The blue team, which represents your companies, your interests, whatever, all right? And get them to work on the new concept. Get another group of your people to be the red team. And the red team can either be your competitors, your competitive environment, your clients, your stakeholders, anybody who is going to be the recipient of your company's output. And have them work the 2 problems separately. When you go from small group theory to total group theory, and then you move them into the same room. And you say, this is what the blue team came up with. Okay, this is what the red team says about it. And in some cases, the red team will say, that's a great idea. We can't counter that. So it's no individual ideas that are being shot down or individual ideas that are being promoted. Everyone will know who had the great idea, but at the, what you're saying, you have a sort of a group group aspect of what the common sense output is. It also allows you to wrestle with how you're going to communicate it from both internally and externally. And you as leadership just have to sit there in the middle and be Solomon. But it also takes, some of that Fingerspitzengefühl that I was talking about, because if the red team does shoot something down, and the leader says, wait a second, I think that young fellow or young lady might be onto something here, where he says, stop. I want to explore that concept further. And it may turn out, maybe to be an untenable idea at that particular point in time, but it's saying, let's all remember to keep this one in our arsenal. Right? And it's a very, very handy way of doing things. By the way, that's how intelligence staffs work.
I think that one of the things in creatives is creatives are, I want to say delicate is the word I want to Billy Bob, you may feel this, but
we may be working with the wrong groups of creatives.
No. Well, no, they're not on the exterior by any means, but interior. I mean, it's tough to have your idea shut down over and over when you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And part of the way you get to the point of what you're talking about, where you are able to go into those types of meetings and be enthusiastic about the team win as opposed to your own, is if you've ever walked into creative agencies, people are brutal to each other on the daily. Like there is so much banter that goes back and forth. There is so much teasing, and you've got to develop that tough hide. And part of the way that you train people to be able to get to the point that you're talking about, Fred, is you slowly, you help them develop that hide. Blair's saying that creatives are more sensitive. That's the word I was going for. It is part of the gift. And as leaders, you have to acknowledge that the right side of the brain that tells you that a great team idea is better than is a fantastic outcome as much as an individual idea. It still doesn't keep a creative from rocking in the corner late at night at home if their ideas got shot down over and over.
But one of the ways that you can give creatives that warm, fuzzy feeling is to love them to have a bit of a catharsis. So even in creative groups, having 1 out of 10 successes in a creative group is generally a pretty good ratio.
Yeah.
And yeah, they do have to develop some tough skin, and sometimes they get a little emotional, a little attached to their particular pet projects. One of the things I used to do when I was director of future security analysis is I would take some groups I would mix the groups up. So if another group was presenting, I would take groups or creatives from another group and saying, you're going to now red team what they've done.
Yeah.
Okay. So get them to play the role of the common sense critic so that they understand that it's not personal, it's just business. Right. And they'll, you'll see, frankly, I like seeing lots of energy in those kinds of conversations, because energy is one of those things that you can use for creativity. Remember, conflict can both be a toxin and a tonic. And it's the experienced leader that knows how to use it for, one or the other. Right?
I think you just have to make sure that tonic keeps having the fizz.
Yes.
At 10 o'clock on a Saturday night,
we're tossing around a lot of metaphors.
Yeah, because it is.
So I'm wondering,
it's that what are you doing what do you do in the interim?
Yeah.
Because that is and I think that good creatives absolutely 100% would be all in for what you're talking about, but leaders have to get them there.
Who's the gin?
Can I ask Billy Bob,
creative agencies,
Billy Bob,
there's always tonic and gin going on. There's always that. That's part of it. Is you gotta have that fun going on so that you can't say, okay, collaborate.
Well, that's right. That's why gamification in any form, we use wargaming, but any form of gamification into that environment is very, very helpful. And you can make it fun.
Good point.
Billy Bob, you can jump in anytime. Fred and I will go. We'll keep going.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to. You can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Sandy can't hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm trying to get Billy Bob to have a chance to say, are you getting some value out of this? Or are you getting some ideas? Or is this depressing?
No, this is, I think I found Sandy's website. So I'm checking that out here on the screen.
Thanks, Billy Bob. I'll be checking yours out after. I can't go. I'm not talented enough to do it all.
But I think sort of, Sandy, finding that delicate balance between allowing room for personal branding versus, the team branding is really important for creatives because, whereas just an idea inside a corporation is something that's going to change shape before it actually becomes real.
Exactly.
Where creative content, that idea might be hanging on a wall for years. So it's like very much in your face and, okay, did I have a role in that or did I not? And so I think trying to balance, I know, for me is, okay, let's make sure that everybody, even if they didn't, at the very end of the meeting, maybe there's this aha moment where we come up with this tagline that is really powerful. And that's the one that's going to live on. And so if you're not careful, just the person that put that very last, that idea was really the entire collaboration is what contributed and produced that idea. But if you're not careful, the group comes away thinking, okay, that person that came up with the very last idea at the very end of the meeting is getting credit for this. And it really is important to me. Trying to figure out how do you keep feeding everybody so they want to keep contributing to that process is pretty tricky.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the difference between novice leadership and seasoned leadership. Seasoned leadership in that kind of situation, promotes the individual who came up with the final solution, but celebrates the entire team that made it happen.
I think what it is a lot of times the leader is, maybe calling in direction from home or out for dinner at a nice steak dinner with the client while you're all in the room with the ideas on the board. So your leader might not be in the room. So I think part of what Billy Bob's talking about is how do you as a team walk out of there and know that this is collaboration and it's not oh my God, it's 2 a.m. and Tom, thank God you came up with that idea. Brilliant. And your leader is often not there.
Well, that's a mistake.
I think a leader who's not there should be appointing somebody else to be leader in the room. I think that's incompetent leadership. That's fearful.
The other piece
negative
that I'm
leadership.
curious how you've addressed is, so if I'm just thinking of just traditional corporate leadership, there's a lot of things that go on around that's very process centric, and I can go develop a process and document that process for my team. And if I do that well enough and train the person under me, then they can carry out that process the same, it almost doesn't matter who I plug in. Creative, it does not work that way.
It absolutely doesn't.
And it's much trickier to say, okay, what can I go put together so that 5 people can come in underneath me and run this exactly the same as me? That's a trick. That's pretty tricky. I'm struggling with that.
Well, I think it's some of it. I'm not sure if you were in here where we talked about it a little earlier. Fred had talked about it from putting those parameters around it. Some of it is you do have your creative briefs. You have the start process of doing your strategic briefs, your creative briefs that will put a bit of a boundary around you, and then you have that freedom within those boundaries. But I think that the way that I've always done it, trained it, developed people, is be more outcome focused than people doing it as you would do it, because with creative they won't do it with you would do it. Know what to borrow a corporate term, the KPIs are, so that they know that they have to shoot for those, and let them come up with whatever process works for them is the process. Because when you're in creative industries, your process is adaptability and flexibility. I always say that your greatest strength, no matter what it is that you're adaptable. When you're in a high pressure creative industry, and so the structure is more around knowing what they have to shoot for. And some of what they have to shoot for is adaptability and flexibility. But it may be that you want to make sure that you've got all of your people, they understand the client, they know the client, they know all of the people who are going to have some sort of say in the outcome that they have to produce. What are these people going to be looking for? I'm going to go back to Fred, where he said you have to have the critic. I called it devil's advocate. How are they going to argue this point? What are they going to see that's a flaw? What's going to be missing for them? So that you're shoring it up as you're going it along. So it's not a linear process, but even if we borrow Fred's terms, you're a dreamer, you're a critic, you're a pragmatist. I would probably use a little different words, but it's the exact same thing. Is part of your process is spitball ideas. That's the first part of your process. Then part of it is make sure that you're looking for the holes. You're devil's advocating each other. And then ask yourself, how are we going to make money on this? How many people are going to have to be involved in this? So that's the structure of a process that I would do. Blair's saying outcome focused is clear, yet leaves room for a variety of ways to get there. That's how creatives are going to do it. If you give them a step-by-step process, you've lost them.
Right. And you know what? That is almost a form of micromanagement. Right.
To give them a process, yeah.
Right. And that's not just for creatives, by the way. That's for that, in terms of concept development, you don't have to create processes for concept development because they already exist. There are things called ICASA, CAST-T, things like that. There's all sorts of documented concept development processes. I don't care which one you pick one and use it. So you end up with some sort of, at least some doctrinal boundaries about how you're going to do it. Right. I'm always a fan of CAST, complex adaptive systems theory, for concept development. But whichever one you're going to use it. What we're really talking about here is something called mission command. I'll throw my uniform back on for a second. Mission command says, doesn't mean I'm going to give you a mission. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It's highly misinterpreted by most people. high-functioning military organizations, which have to be very adaptive. They have to be intelligent, resilient, robust, flexible, agile, creative, responsive, enduring, the 4 hallmarks of adaptation, 8 hallmarks of adaptation. Any organization has to have these things. And what Mission Command says is, me as the leader, as the grand poobah, that big cheese, the grand fromage, whichever term you want to use, I'm going to tell you my higher intent. In the military, we call this commander's intent, but you call it CEO's intent, leader's intent, whatever. I'm going to give you my intent. I'm going to give you some constraints and some restraints, things that you must do, things that you must never do, and pretty much everything else outside those 2 things is fair game. And within the following process, let's say we'll use CAST-T or ICASA or whatever you want, any of the concept development paradigms. I'll let you guys design your mission. And when you figure out what your mission is, you're going to come back, brief me on it. And then after that, you're on your own. Now, does that mean that you become disengaged as a leader? No. It just means that you've done mission development with that concept development team about how you're going to go forward. And certainly, if Sandy pointed out, if you got guys in there at as Des pointed out, if your team is out there working at 2:00 in the morning and you're not there, that is a fundamental failure of leadership.
But you know what? It's not, because you've got 5 teams.
But you're a participant in the process, not necessarily leading the process.
Okay.
You're keeping it on the straight and narrow.
You have to keep in mind, in creative organizations, you typically don't, as a leader, you typically don't just have 1 team and 1 assignment.
Yes.
You can't be 5 places at 5 times, which is why you have to be able to create people.
You have to be judicious about your time and place.
Absolutely. And, it's a little bit of what you talked about before, is what I certainly did as a leader in creative industries, and it's what I use to help develop leaders now, is you have to make it so that if you disappear, it's going to almost get to that higher level. It's Des's basketball term, and that's the end product. How you get there are a lot of the techniques that we've been talking about, the Billy Bob's been talking about, is how you get there with creatives isn't necessarily totally different, but there is a little bit more.
Yes, and sometimes they will look at things a little too personally, and that's, again, one of the many challenges in leadership, and it's no different with creatives as it is with anybody else. Your job, to use one of Des's very popular sports metaphors that he likes using, let me throw out my own sports metaphor. What's the role of a good leader is to get people playing for the name on the front of the shirt, not the name on the back of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what it is if you walk into an ad agency, it's bananas a lot of times, and a lot of it is the banter that goes back and forth. I'm sure you have it in the military too, but to get to all of those places you're talking about with people who are very creatively inclined, you have to daily get them there. And yes, it is the same thing.
That's where the constraints and restraints come in, because they're signposts of how to get there. But it's up to you to make sure you've chosen the right ones.
Right.
Right. People always say, well, let's do some out-of-the-box thinking. I hate the term.
I do too.
Right. One of the who was it? The guy that ran for an independent as a president of the United States.
I know.
Ross Perot.
Yeah.
Ross Perot said, if you will, one of the things you discover when you ask people to think out of the box is that they can't think inside the box, because there's always a box, right? There's always constraints and restraints what you can do, but it's up to leadership to make sure that you've defined the box correctly, right? And if people have to think outside the boxes, you gave them the wrong box.
I think on that note, as we're technically the leadership hour, and we've gone a bit over the hour. I think we'll continue this. I think there's a lot more in this conversation than we've covered today. And I don't know about you, Billy Bob, but I think you've raised a real conundrum. I'd really like to explore that a bit more if you want to turn up again next week.
Yeah, that's great.
That would make a good subject by itself.
Now you were talking about doing it earlier next week. Where are you, Billy Bob? You said you're on the East Coast?
No, I'm Fort Worth.
Oh, Fort Worth. Okay.
Central time zone.
Yeah.
So Central Time, yeah.
Fort Worth. So what do you all feel about the time? Is this? I mean, it's okay with me, but I can do it a bit earlier if you think an earlier time would be better.
It makes.
I think any time's
yeah,
going
I
to
got
be
a guy in Australia,
problematic
one on
for
the
some and
West
good for
Coast,
others.
one on the East Coast, one in the Great White North.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be tough. By the way, we do have 6 time zones in this country. So, but Newfoundland's only a half an hour, so don't worry about it. But the
All right.
whatever time we're going to pick here is going to be inconvenient to somebody. So,
Yeah. And Robin, we didn't get a chance to hear from you, but I hope you've found it of interest. Social media professional, St. Louis. Sure, I said St. Louis or St.
St.
Louis?
Louis.
St. Louis.
I
is
say
it?
St. Louis,
I don't
but
know. I never know. St. Louis. Well, in the song, it used to be "Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis."
don't know that
Meet me
song.
at the
Dad.
I
fair.
was quite
Don't
perturbed
tell
that
me the
that
lights
wasn't
are
on
shining
this
any
last
place but there.
Thanksgiving. That is always on Thanksgiving, and it wasn't. Yes, and I was quite upset
Really?
about it.
What wasn't Meet Me in St. Louis?
St. Louis with Judy Garland.
No. In the song, it's "Meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair. Don't tell me the lights are shining any place but there. We will dance a hoochie coochie. You will be my hoochie if you will meet me in
I'll
St.
keep
Louis,
giving you
Louis,
props
meet
as
me
long
at
as
the
you keep
fair."
singing.
I want to know which was more memorable, Billy Bob, that song or the Gatorade story from Friends.
The
Gatorade
Gatorade
story
has an
definitely
open
takes
mic
the
night once a month. I think you should go on there on his open mic.
I feel like this was
sing that
open
song.
mic night. and
Yeah, feels like it. Okay, folks. Well,
Okay.
listen, we'll meet again this time next week.
Feel free to hit
and,
me up too, Billy
continue the
Bob, on my
conversation.
Facebook or on my Twitter or whatever too. If you have a specific question, happy
Great.
to.
And Billy Bob, I recommend having a chat with Lieutenant Colonel retired Canadian military Fred, because he has great
Thanks, guys.
insight in this whole
I
subject.
think everything has a leadership.
So catch
Every
him on his
every
website.
problem is a leadership problem.
Yep.
Night, Des. Night, Sandy.
Nice to see you, Fred. Bye.
On
Bye,
that note,
Des.
thank you. Good night, all. Bye.